I'm writing this letter because staying will get you killed, and I can't live knowing that." The words tore out of Mia Morales before she could stop them, her fingers trembling over the envelope in the October darkness. The Las Vegas night cut through the courthouse parking lot like a blade wrapped in ice, bitter and dry, dead leaves skittering across the concrete at 11:11 p.m. 3 hours earlier, she had been dragged into a courtroom not as a witness, but as the accused. Douglas Hale had filed the charges himself. Theft of $35,000 in cash and jewelry from the Harrington suite. Margaret Harrington had appeared in tailored cream wool, her diamond necklace catching the fluorescent courtroom lights as she pointed one manicured finger at Mia and spoke the words that changed everything. A criminal. A woman who exploited family trust. A thief. The bailiff had read the charges with mechanical precision. The judge had set a trial date 12 days away. The same 12 days printed in red ink across the eviction notice crumpled in Mia's pocket right now, the notice that told her the apartment where she raised Emma would no longer be hers. She had $78 to her name. No lawyer. No defense. No witnesses who would speak for her because people like Mia Morales did not have people who spoke. They had silence. They had invisibility. They had the weight of other people's lies crushing down until there was nothing left but the impulse to disappear. But what made her hands shake as she wrote was not the courtroom, not the charges, not even the eviction notice. It was the man sitting in the back row whom she had not seen until the gavel fell. Nicholas Calabrese. Dark suit, silver-cuffed wrists, face carved from stone. He sat with the kind of stillness that made other men seem loud. She had recognized him immediately because 3 weeks ago, she had saved his life. 21 days earlier. The Calabrese mansion sprawled across 10 acres of Las Vegas real estate like a fortress that had grown tired of pretending to be a home. White limestone, black-trimmed windows, gardens that cost more to maintain than Mia's annual salary. She worked there 3 nights a week, cleaning the West Wing while the men conducted business in rooms she was not supposed to understand. On that night, she had been emptying trash from the study on the 3rd floor when she heard the gunshot. Not loud. Muffled, like someone had wrapped the violence in cloth before pulling the trigger. Her hands had gone still. Every woman who has nothing learns to make herself small in the presence of danger. She had pressed herself against the wall and waited. The sounds that followed were worse than the shot. Heavy breathing. The wet sound of a body collapsing. Footsteps running past, shouting in Italian she did not understand. Then silence, the kind of silence that means someone is dying alone in a room nearby. Mia should have left. She should have walked down those marble stairs and out through the kitchen and disappeared into the Vegas night where she belonged. That is what the smart people do. That is what she had always done when trouble appeared. But she was carrying Emma's medical bill in her pocket that night, a paper that said her daughter needed a specialist and it would cost $4,700 and she had $340 saved over 4 years. She was not thinking like a smart person anymore. She was thinking like a mother who had already lost too much. So she had found him. Nicholas Calabrese was lying on the floor of his private study, a bullet wound in his left shoulder, blood spreading across the white Italian marble like spilled wine. His eyes were open, watching the ceiling with the expression of a man who was trying to decide if dying was worth the effort. He did not hear her enter. Men like that do not usually hear women like her. She moved without thinking. Grabbed every towel from his private bathroom. Pressed them against the wound with hands that did not shake because her hands did not have permission to shake. She had seen blood before. Not like this, but enough. Enough to know the difference between a wound that kills and a wound that only destroys. He made a sound, something between a laugh and a cough, and his eyes found her face. "You," he said. His voice was deep, solid like an oath. "I know you. You clean the hallways." "Hold this," she told him, pressing his hand against the towels. "Do not move. Do not argue. Just hold this and stay quiet." She ran downstairs. Found Carlo, his lieutenant, in the kitchen briefing 2 other men about some business she did not understand. Carlo's face changed when she told him where Nicholas was. Changed again when he realized a maid had found him first. But by the time they reached the study, she had already stopped the bleeding. She had already cleaned the wound with alcohol she found in his bathroom, already wrapped him with fresh towels from the linen closet, already propped him up so he would not choke if he lost consciousness. She was sitting on the edge of the blood-soaked marble floor when Carlo rushed in with 4 armed men. "Get her out," Nicholas said to Carlo. His voice had not changed. Still calm. Still solid. Not roughly. She was helping. Carlo's eyes moved between Mia and his boss. She could see him doing the mathematics, trying to understand how a maid had touched Nicholas Calabrese's bare chest and lived to walk out the door. But he nodded. He gestured, and someone brought her a coat, though the night was warm. Someone brought her to a car. Someone took her home, and when she walked into her apartment and locked the door, Emma was asleep on the couch, still waiting for her. That had been 3 weeks ago. She had not seen him since. Now, standing in the courthouse parking lot at 11:41 p.m., Mia understood what was happening. Douglas Hale worked at the Harrington Hotel as the night manager. He had known about her wages for 2 years, had stolen every tip left in the employee room, had blamed her when the money disappeared. The first time he hit her, she had been too shocked to run. The second time, she knew not to fight back. The third time, she had finally borrowed money from her neighbor and called in sick for 3 weeks. But Margaret Harrington needed a reason to justify firing her. And Douglas Hale needed a reason to keep her silent about what his hands had done to her body. So they had orchestrated this together. They had gone to the police with a fabricated story about a maid who stole from one of the richest families in Las Vegas. And because Mia Morales was nobody, because she had no lawyer and no money and no family with a name, the judge had believed them. The letter was finished now. She had written it on a piece of paper she had stolen from the courthouse restroom. She was sealing it with her thumb when a black SUV pulled into the parking lot, cutting through the dark like a blade. The engine died. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of control that made the world seem to slow down. Nicholas Calabrese. His left arm was still healing, the bullet wound hidden beneath a tailored white shirt, but he moved as if nothing had touched him. "You're not mailing that letter," he said. Mia's hands trembled. "You should not be here. You should not be near me. She is dangerous, the Harrington woman. And Hale is going to disappear tomorrow," Nicholas said. "And so is Margaret Harrington. But you're not disappearing, Mia. You're going to go home and pack Emma's things. You're going to bring her to my house. And then you're going to tell me everything. I cannot accept." "You can," he said. His voice was like thunder, low and inevitable. "You saved my life when you could have walked past me. I found you in that courtroom because I have people who watch what happens to people connected to me. And I find the idea of letting you vanish rather offensive." The wind moved through the parking lot, cold and empty, carrying the smell of rain coming from somewhere out in the desert. Mia looked at the envelope in her hands, the letter that was supposed to save him from the violence she believed was following her. Then she looked at Nicholas Calabrese, at the scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, at the gold watch on his wrist worth more than her entire life. At the absolute certainty in his expression that what he had decided was already done. She thought of Emma asleep at home, in the apartment they would lose in 12 days. She thought of Douglas Hale's hands. She thought of the word the judge had used. Criminal. Mia tore the letter in half. The pieces scattered across the parking lot like snow, and Nicholas Calabrese watched them fall without moving, without speaking, without anything in his expression changing at all. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay. I will go home. I will pack. I will bring her to you." "Good," he said. "And Mia? That letter you were going to write about staying away from me for my protection. The next person who makes you believe that kind of lie, you come find me first." He turned and walked back to the SUV, leaving her standing alone in the dark, alive in a way she had not been alive before. The wind carried dust and the memory of his voice, solid and certain as an oath, and Mia understood that something in her world had fractured in that moment and would never fit back together the same way again. She looked at the pieces of the letter scattered across the concrete, already being carried away by the October wind, and she started walking toward the parking lot exit. Toward home. Toward the daughter who was waiting. Toward whatever came next. The marble hallway stretched endlessly, lit by chandeliers that cost more than Mia Morales had earned in 10 years. Her left eye had swollen shut an hour ago. Her throat bore the shape of Douglas Hale's fingers in purple and black. She moved like a ghost through the Calabrese mansion, one hand pressed against her ribs where pain bloomed with every breath, the other trailing along walls she was meant to clean, not depend on for balance. The apartment would be gone in 12 days. The eviction notice sat on her kitchen table at home, printed in red ink so bright it looked like a warning written in blood. 12 days. Emma's school supplies weren't paid for. The refrigerator held 3 eggs and a carton of milk that had turned. Mia had exactly $78 in her pocket, crumpled bills she'd been saving for Emma's winter coat. Now Douglas Hale owned those dollars too. He owned everything. He'd made that clear when his fist connected with her eye socket. "You'll pay back what you stole," he'd hissed, his breath reeking of scotch and menace. $35,000, Mia. 2 weeks. Or I'm filing a police report. You'll be arrested. They'll take Emma away from you. The words had hollowed her out more than the punch. She hadn't stolen anything. The $50 bill in her apron had been payment for working a double shift, time she'd spent on her feet while Margaret Harrington's guests ignored her, walked past her, looked through her like she was part of the furniture. But Hale didn't care about the truth. He decided she was a thief, and in his world, his decisions were the only ones that mattered. He managed the hotel where she'd worked before this position. He controlled her employment. He controlled her story. He controlled her. The service hallway opened onto the main corridor, and Mia heard voices, men's voices, sharp and urgent, coming from the study 3 doors down. She should keep walking. She should disappear into the walls like she always did, become invisible, become nothing. Instead, her feet carried her toward the sound. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the way pain had loosened something inside her, made her stop caring about the rules. The study door was cracked open. Through the gap, she saw a man sitting behind an obsidian desk, his white shirt soaked crimson. Blood dripped from his fingers onto papers worth thousands of dollars, and he didn't seem to notice or care. 2 other men stood frozen beside him, both dressed in suits that probably cost more than Mia's entire apartment, both staring at their boss like they'd just watched the sky fall. "We need a doctor," the first man said. Franco, Mia thought his name was. She'd heard the servants whispering about him. Now. Before infection sets in. "No," the man at the desk said. His voice was strange, calm and flat, like someone speaking from very far away. "No hospitals. No records." "Sir." I said no. The second man, Carlo, shifted his weight. "The Russo family knows we're vulnerable. If they find out you're wounded, then they'll attack, and we'll defend the territory. But we do it quietly." He pressed the wound again, and fresh blood pooled across his palm. "Find me someone who can." Mia pushed the door open. 3 guns appeared so fast she barely saw the movement. The 2 men had weapons drawn before she could breathe, both barrels pointed at her like fingers accusing her of a crime. For a moment, the world stopped. The only sound was the whisper of her own heart, hammering against her broken ribs. "Don't shoot her," the man at the desk said. His eyes were dark gray, the color of stone. The color of winter. They moved across Mia's face slowly, cataloging every mark, every bruise, every sign of violence. She watched something shift behind those eyes, a door opening, letting something cold and dangerous slip through. "Let her come forward." The guns lowered but didn't disappear. Mia walked to the desk on legs that weren't quite steady. Up close, she could see the bullet wound more clearly, a straight entry point on his left side, the blood still flowing too freely, the edges of the wound already beginning to swell. He'd been shot recently. Very recently. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mia," she whispered. I work here. For the Harringtons." "And who put those marks on your face?" She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. Speaking it aloud would make it real in a way that was unbearable. Instead, she reached down and took the vodka bottle from his desk drawer, the one he'd been pressing against his wound. Her hand shook as she poured it over the injury, and the man's jaw tightened, but he made no sound. Carlo and Franco watched like they were seeing something impossible. "She's a servant," Carlo said quietly. "Sir, we shouldn't let her." "She's someone who knows how to help people who are bleeding," Nicholas Calabrese said, his voice like venom wrapped in courtesy. "That's what matters." Mia worked with bandages from a first aid kit she found in the desk, her own blood still dripping from her split lips onto his $1,000 rug, staining it darker. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she'd stopped affording herself years ago, somewhere on a Greyhound bus heading toward the promise of Las Vegas and the disappointment that followed. When she tied off the bandage, her fingers were steady. That surprised her. Nicholas caught her wrist before she could pull away. His grip wasn't hard, but it was absolute, like a cage made of silk and steel. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her want to run. It was recognition, but not of her. He was recognizing violence. He was recognizing the specific cruelty that comes from people who believe they have power over people who have none. "Who did this to you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter," Mia said, pulling her hand back. He released her, but his eyes didn't look away. "People like me don't get justice. People like me just get what comes. Tell me his name." "No." She stepped back from the desk, from those gray eyes that saw too much. "I won't. Because I can't afford what will happen if you do anything about it. He has power. He has lawyers. I have $78 and an eviction notice. If you make him angry, he'll destroy me. He'll take Emma, and I'll have nothing." Franco and Carlo exchanged a look that Mia couldn't quite read, the kind of look that passed between men who had seen many things and believed very few of them would surprise them again. But they looked surprised now. They looked like they were witnessing something that violated some fundamental law they'd lived by their entire lives. "You're protecting him," Nicholas said. It wasn't a question. "I'm protecting my daughter." He studied her for a long moment, his hand returning to his wounded side, blood seeping through the fresh bandage. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Las Vegas lights glittered like broken teeth in the dark. "Go home," he said finally. "Make sure your daughter is safe. Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone." "What?" "Go." Mia left the study, left the mansion, left the bleeding man behind his obsidian desk. She didn't know that Nicholas Calabrese had already made a decision in that moment. She didn't know that men who left marks like that on women didn't have very long to live in his world. She didn't know that Carlo and Franco had already begun making phone calls, setting things in motion, calling in favors from people who specialized in the permanent removal of problems. She only knew that her ribs ached, and her eye had swollen completely shut, and she had 12 days before everything she had left in the world would be taken from her. The October wind caught her as she walked to her car, a 2009 Honda Civic with a check engine light that had been on for 2 years. The wind was cold and carried dust from the desert, and it smelled like rain coming. Like a storm building somewhere out beyond the city, gathering strength, preparing to strike. She drove through empty streets toward the apartment where Emma slept, and she didn't notice the black SUV that pulled out from the mansion's gate behind her, keeping 3 car lengths back, its headlights off, following her like a shadow that refused to disappear. The courthouse doors loomed like the entrance to a tomb, all gray marble and cold authority, and Mia Morales stood before them with her hands shaking so badly she couldn't keep them still. October 21st. The day everything ended. She wore the only dress she owned that wasn't stained or torn, a navy thing she'd bought at a thrift store 7 years ago for $23. Her hair was pulled back so tight it hurt. Her left eye still carried a shadow of purple from Hale's fist, makeup doing its best to hide what 3 weeks hadn't quite healed. $78 remained in her bank account. The eviction notice was taped to her apartment door in red ink. And in exactly 4 hours, a judge whose golf club membership Margaret Harrington sponsored, would declare her a thief. Inside the courtroom, the air hung thick and suffocating, recycled through vents that hummed like dying insects. Margaret Harrington sat in the front row in a white Chanel suit, her blonde hair arranged in perfect waves, her smile serene as a saint's. Beside her, Douglas Hale wore the mask of a concerned businessman, his tailored suit charcoal gray, his shoes Italian leather polished to a mirror shine. The prosecutor, a thin man with silver temples and eyes like a calculator, presented his evidence. Security footage. A handwritten list of items. Mia's photograph beside Margaret's bed. But the footage was edited. The timestamps were wrong. The items in the photograph belonged to Margaret's collection for years. None of it mattered. Your Honor, Mia's court-appointed attorney stammered, a young woman so nervous she kept dropping her papers. My client denies these allegations. There is no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no. Miss Morales, the judge interrupted, removing his glasses. You have worked at the Calabrese mansion for how long? 3 years, Your Honor. And in that time, you've accessed restricted areas. Only to clean, sir. I was instructed to. And your apartment is facing eviction. Silence. The kind of silence where the courtroom held its breath. Yes, Your Honor. And you've had financial troubles? Unpaid medical bills? Debts? Mia's attorney stood. Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant. Overruled. The pattern is relevant to motive. The judge replaced his glasses. When he looked at Mia again, his expression held something worse than anger. It held absolute certainty. The certainty of a man who had already made his decision before she ever entered the room. I find the evidence compelling, he said. His gavel moved like a blade through air. The defendant is guilty of theft in the amount of $35,000. Restitution is to be paid within 30 days. Failure to do so will result in felony charges and potential incarceration. The gavel fell. 30 seconds. That's how long it took for Mia's life to collapse. She didn't cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on I-15 during her drive to the courthouse. Instead, she felt something hollow open in her chest, a cavity where hope had lived. Margaret stood, gathering her Birkin bag with hands that trembled from barely suppressed laughter. She leaned toward Mia as they passed in the aisle. Poor thing, she whispered. You should have stayed invisible. You're much less troublesome when nobody knows your name. Mia walked out into the October afternoon. The sky was clear, that brilliant blue that Las Vegas gets in fall, sun so bright it burned. But the light felt cruel. It illuminated everything she was about to lose. Her phone buzzed. A text from the apartment complex, notice of immediate eviction, October 21st, 6 p.m. Failure to vacate by this time will result in removal by police. That was 6 hours away. She drove to the apartment because she didn't know what else to do. The 3 rooms where she'd built a life with Emma sat exactly as she'd left them that morning. A child's pink backpack hung by the door. Books lined a homemade shelf, stories Mia had read aloud 1,000 times, wearing different voices for each character. A drawing taped to the refrigerator, Mia's stick figure hand in hand with Emma's, both wearing crowns made of yellow crayon. Colors for happy days, Emma had explained months ago, carefully adding each detail. When you feel sad, you look at this. Mia took the drawing down. She folded it and placed it in her purse. By 5:56 p.m., the eviction notice had become a reality. 2 police officers stood in her apartment while movers, hired by the landlord, began boxing her possessions. Her clothes. Her books. The mattress where she slept. the cot where Emma lay when she was allowed to visit. One of the officers was older, maybe 50, with kind eyes that looked away when Mia passed. The other was younger, hard-eyed, efficient as a machine. He carried out her possessions without seeing her as a person. She was inventory. A line item. A problem being solved. She had nowhere to go. The thought sat in her mind like a stone. Nowhere to go. No money. No job. Hale had made sure of that, calling every hotel in the city within hours of the verdict. No family. No friends with extra space. No safe place for Emma, who was currently at Margaret's penthouse, being told that Mia had abandoned her because she was a thief. Mia's Honda Civic was parked on the street, everything she could carry already loaded inside, 2 suitcases, a trash bag of clothes, Emma's belongings carefully wrapped in a blanket. She sat in the driver's seat with her hands gripping the wheel, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to consider the letter she'd started writing 3 nights ago. It was at home. In her purse. Half finished because she couldn't find words big enough to contain an apology. The sound of an engine pulled her from her thoughts. A black SUV pulled up behind her, windows tinted so dark they looked like the eyes of something predatory. The doors opened silently. 2 men emerged, then 3, then 4, all wearing identical black suits that cost more than her net worth multiplied by 10. Carlo stepped from the front passenger seat. His scarred face and cold eyes had haunted her nightmares, but right now he looked almost gentle. Behind him, Franco nodded at her through the windshield. Carlo opened the driver's side door. "The boss is waiting," he said. His voice was rough gravel. "You're coming with us." "I can't," Mia started, but Carlo was already reaching for her suitcase. "Not a request, Miss Morales." The night consumed everything else. The sound of the SUV's engine. The hum of the highway. The city lights strung like pearls against the darkness. All of it faded into background noise because Mia was being transported to a man who was powerful enough to move mountains, who had proven in the last month that he would protect her, and who was about to discover what had happened in that courtroom today. She didn't know that Nicholas Calabrese had received the verdict before she did. That he'd been waiting in his study, watching the courthouse live stream with the coldness of a general observing a defeated enemy. She didn't know that Margaret Harrington had just made the greatest mistake of her life, proving to a man who specialized in removing problems that she had become one. And she didn't know that by the time the sun rose on October 22nd, the machinery of vengeance would already be grinding forward, unstoppable as fate itself. But she was about to find out. The courthouse doors swung open and the October sunlight hit Mia's face like a slap. She blinked, adjusting to the brightness, but her eyes stayed hollow. The verdict had landed 3 hours ago and the weight of it hadn't lifted. It had only grown heavier, pressing down on her chest like a stone sinking through water. Bail was set at $50,000. $50,000. The number didn't feel real. It existed in a different dimension than the $78 in her wallet, the wrinkled bills she'd been counting and recounting since dawn, as if repetition might somehow multiply them into something that mattered. The bail amount was a pronouncement of impossibility. It was the judge telling her that her freedom had a price tag higher than anything she would ever be able to reach. The bailiff had released her on a technicality, some procedural error that Mia didn't fully understand. She'd stopped listening somewhere between the testimony and the gavel striking down like thunder on marble. What she did understand was that she had 12 days before the eviction notice became real, before the locks changed and Emma lost her bedroom, her stuffed animals arranged on the shelf, the night light shaped like a moon that cast pale shadows on the walls. 12 days to find $50,000. She walked through downtown Las Vegas in the bitter October wind, her maid's uniform still on her body because she hadn't gone home to change. The stained collar rubbed against her neck. The hem was torn where Hale had grabbed her 3 weeks ago, before everything fell apart, before Margaret Harrington had decided that destroying Mia would be easier than facing her own embezzlement. The wind carried the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. It carried the smell of exhaust and desperation and the copper-tinged fear that never quite left her mouth these days. Her apartment building loomed ahead at the corner of 5th and Morrison. The eviction notice was still taped to the door, fluorescent red paper glowing under the streetlight like a warning beacon. 12 days. The number was printed in bold letters, the deadline circled by the landlord's aggressive red pen. 12 days and she would have nowhere to go. Emma would have nowhere to go. Mia climbed the stairs to the roof. The city sprawled below her in all directions, a constellation of neon signs and car horns and the endless hum of people who had somewhere to be, someone to be with, money in their pockets. She walked to the edge, her breath visible in the cold air, small clouds dissipating into nothing. The letter was already in her pocket. She'd started it 3 days ago, when the desperation had first transformed into clarity. A strange, terrible clarity that felt almost like peace. She'd written the first line 100 times, scratching it out, rewriting it, trying to find words large enough to contain what she needed him to understand. She pulled out the envelope now. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded. The ink had begun to smudge where her tears had landed. Dear Nicholas, it started. I'm writing this letter because staying will get you killed, and I can't live knowing that. Her hand trembled violently. The pen tore through the paper. She started again, her breath coming faster, shallower, as if the cold was stealing oxygen from the air. She couldn't finish. Couldn't form the words that would explain why she had to disappear, why staying in his orbit would only drag him toward the same ruin that had swallowed her whole. A sound stopped her. It was small and fragile. A mewling cry, almost human in its desperation. Mia turned and saw it emerging from behind the roof access door, a cat, skeletal and matted, limping on 3 legs with its 4th paw held up against its body. Its ribs showed through its fur-like xylophone keys. Its eyes were amber and intelligent and utterly alone. The cat crossed the roof toward her without hesitation, pressing its frail body against her ankle. It was purring, a sound like an engine barely running, barely alive, but running nonetheless. Mia crouched down. Her hands moved without her permission, lifting the cat, cradling its fragile weight against her chest. She could feel every vertebra in its spine, could feel its heart beating in rapid, desperate rhythm against her palm. It was struggling to survive. It was hurt and starving and still trying. She carried the cat downstairs. Found the last of her crackers in the kitchen cupboard and broke them into pieces on the floor. The cat ate with ferocious determination, as if it had learned that food might disappear and survival depended on consuming every available calorie in the next 10 seconds. Mia sat on the kitchen floor and watched it eat, and somewhere in the act of caring for something smaller and more broken than herself, something shifted. She sealed the envelope at 11:17 p.m. Her fingers shook as she pressed the seal, as she wrote his name on the front in careful, deliberate letters. She would leave it on the kitchen table. She would disappear into the Vegas night and he would find it in the morning and he would understand that she was doing this to protect him. That she was choosing to vanish so that his world wouldn't burn. But at 11:43 p.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up to Douglas Hale's penthouse apartment in the Palazzo district. Carlo knocked once. Just once, a single impact on the door that sounded like an executioner's gavel. When Hale opened the door in his silk robe, his face flushed from wine and celebration because he believed he'd already won, he saw a man standing in the hallway whose eyes looked like winter death. "You made a mistake," Nicholas Calabrese said. His voice was quiet. Quiet in the way that thunder is quiet right before it destroys everything. "You touched what's mine." Hale's expression shifted in a fraction of a second. The grin dissolved. The confidence evaporated. What replaced it was pure animal panic. "I can explain," he started, but the words died in his throat because 12 men in black suits had materialized behind Nicholas, and they were moving forward with the synchronized precision of a machine that had been oiled and maintained and tested 1,000 times before. Hale turned to run. He made it for steps before Carlo's hand closed on his collar and dragged him backward like he weighed nothing, his expensive loafers squeaking against the marble in a sound that was almost comical. "Almost." "Please," Hale gasped. "Please, I'll give you money. Whatever you want. I have cash in the safe." Nicholas crouched down until his eyes were level with Hale's eyes. "I don't want your money," he said. His tone was conversational, almost gentle. I want you to understand something. That woman you framed, that woman you beat until she couldn't see out of one eye. She saved my life. She chose kindness when she had every reason to run. When she had every reason to hate. And you? Franco stepped forward and dropped a file on the floor. Photographs scattered across the marble like confetti at a funeral. Mia's throat with his handprints turning purple. Mia's eye swelling shut. Mia collapsed on the floor of his office with her uniform torn. Bank records showing money flowing into Hale's personal accounts. Security footage from the hotel safe, time-stamped, showing Hale himself stealing the cash he'd framed Mia for taking. Hale made a sound like an animal with its leg caught in a trap. "You're done," Nicholas said, standing up. He turned away without waiting for a response because the outcome was predetermined, because his men had already obtained what they needed from Hale's apartment, and because mercy wasn't a transaction Nicholas Calabrese engaged in anymore. At Margaret Harrington's estate on the other side of the city, a different team moved with identical synchronization. She answered the door in a cream silk robe, a champagne glass balanced in her perfectly manicured fingers, and the glass fell before she fully understood what was happening. It shattered on the marble with a sound like ice cracking. Margaret Harrington, the lead federal agent, announced, his badge already visible, his gun already holstered but present. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit perjury." Margaret's face cycled through shock, indignation, and then the terrible realization that her network of lawyers and connections and social standing couldn't protect her from federal charges. Not when the evidence was already packaged and handed to prosecutors. Not when Nicholas Calabrese had spent the last month collecting everything she'd tried to hide. "You can't," she said, but her voice had no power. "We have everything," the agent continued. "Bank records showing you stole $340,000 from your investors. Emails proving you fabricated evidence against Mia Morales. Testimony from 3 hotel staff members stating that you coerced them into lying under oath." The handcuffs closed around her wrists with a sound like a vault door slamming shut. Margaret was processed separately from Hale. She sat in the federal holding cell in an orange jumpsuit that looked obscene against her pale skin, her eyes staring at nothing. Her diamonds were gone, confiscated as evidence. Her connection to her lawyers was severed by the bars of her cell. Neither of them would see daylight as a free person for 40 years. The courthouse steps were empty at midnight except for her. Mia Morales stood in the November cold, her fingers trembling as she folded the letter one more time, sealing it with nothing but her own desperate hope. The envelope felt like a weight, like a blade wrapped in ice, like the only mercy she had left to offer. She placed it carefully on the stone step, anchored it with a smooth pebble from the planter, and turned to walk away from everything. Footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. "You're a terrible liar, Mia." She spun. Nicholas Calabrese stood 10 feet away, his black cashmere coat dusted with dead leaves, his hands in his pockets like a man who didn't need weapons anymore because he'd already won. His eyes, storm gray and burning, fixed on her with the intensity of someone who'd been searching all night. Behind him, 2 black SUVs idled silently. Carlo and Franco waited by the vehicles, shadows in tailored suits. "How did you?" Mia's voice broke. "I've had men watching you since the hearing ended," Nicholas said quietly. He walked forward, picked up her letter, turned it over in his hands like it was written in a language only he could understand. "You were going to run." "I have to." The words tore out of her like bleeding. "Hale and Margaret will destroy you if I stay. The Russos are already circling." "I'm just a maid, Nicholas. I'm not worth the blood that's going to spill if I don't disappear." "Don't." The single word cracked like a whip through the parking lot. Nicholas closed the distance between them, his expensive shoes clicking against concrete. "Don't tell me what you're worth." He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, close enough to hear him breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Douglas Hale is in federal custody as of 6 hours ago. 42 years for embezzlement, assault, and conspiracy. Margaret Harrington is in the cell next to him. 38 years for fraud and coercion. The charges against you were dropped an hour ago. The eviction notice is void. Mia's world tilted. The eviction notice, she whispered. I bought your building, Nicholas said. All of it. Your name is on the deed. Emma's room is waiting for her. You're not losing anything. Why? The word tore out of her raw. Why would you do this? You don't know me. I'm nobody. I'm a maid who served you coffee and cleaned your study and walked into a room with 3 guns pointed at me because I was stupid enough to care. Nicholas opened the letter. His eye scanned the words she'd written in shaking handwriting at 3 in the morning. I'm writing this letter because staying will get you killed, and I can't live knowing that. He looked up, and his expression was something she'd never seen before. It was raw. It was broken. It was real. My brother betrayed me because he thought I was weak, Nicholas said, each word deliberate. He sold our family to the Russos for money and power and the promise of a throne that wasn't his to take. I had to choose between mercy and survival, and I chose survival. I've been choosing it for 3 years. I've been choosing it for so long that I forgot mercy had a face. He stepped closer. But you chose differently. You walked into a room with 3 guns pointed at your chest and helped a man who could have killed you without blinking. You poured everything you had into a child who isn't yours. You wrote this letter because you thought saving me mattered more than saving yourself. You thought your life was less valuable than mine. His hand came up, gentle despite the calluses, despite the power that lived in those fingers. He cupped her face like she was something precious he'd finally learned to hold. You're wrong about one thing, Mia Morales. You're not just a maid. You're the only person in 15 years who made me remember what mercy feels like. You're the only person who saw me and didn't see power or money or fear. You saw a man who was bleeding, and you stayed. Mia's tears came hot and fast, burning her cheeks in the cold November air. I don't know how to be what you need, she said. I don't know how to live in a world where people like me get to have things. I don't know how to. You already are, Nicholas said. And then he kissed her, soft and careful, like she was something that could break if he wasn't gentle. Like she was worth the gentleness. Like she was worth everything. Carlo and Franco turned away, silent and respectful. The wind scattered more dead leaves across the empty parking lot. In that moment, with the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement and Nicholas's coat wrapped around her shoulders, Mia Morales stopped running. She stopped surviving. She finally allowed herself to start living. 6 weeks later, the morning sun touched the windows of the Calabrese mansion, warm and golden and real. November had turned into December, and Mia stood in the marble foyer with Emma's small hand in hers. The child was 4 years old, with dark curls and eyes like melted chocolate, and she'd started calling Mia something that made her heart stop every single time. Mama, Emma said, pointing to the framed eviction notice on the wall. Why do you keep the sad paper? Mia knelt down, smoothing the child's hair away from her face. Because it reminds me that sometimes the things that scare us the most are also the things that save us. It reminds me that we're safe now. Emma considered this with the serious expression of a child who'd seen too much. We don't ever have to leave. Never, Mia promised. Not now. Not ever. Nicholas appeared in the doorway, wearing a charcoal suit instead of his usual black, his expression softer than it had been when Mia first knew him. He'd been in meetings with federal prosecutors all morning, solidifying his transition from the underworld into legitimate business. The Calabrese Foundation had just announced its first initiative, a scholarship fund for children raised in poverty, named after a woman who'd taught him that mercy wasn't weakness. Emma, he said, and the child's face lit up like he'd hung the moon. Want to help me with something? What? Emma bounced excitedly. It's a secret, Nicholas said, and Carlo and Franco exchanged looks from across the room, the kind of looks they'd exchanged 3 months ago when they realized their boss had fundamentally changed. When they realized that loyalty now meant protecting something fragile instead of just breaking things. Nicholas walked to Mia, took her hand, and led her to the garden. The December sun was warm against her skin, and the dead leaves from November had been cleared away, replaced with plants that were just beginning to grow. A garden that was being coaxed back to life after years of neglect. "I need to ask you something," Nicholas said, and his voice was different now, not the voice of a man commanding armies, but the voice of a man asking permission. Mia's heart stopped. Nicholas reached into his pocket and withdrew a ring. Not ostentatious. Not a statement of wealth. A simple band of white gold with a diamond that caught the light like a candle refusing to go out. "I know I'm not the man you should want," he said quietly. "I know my hands have done terrible things. I know there are people who would say that men like me don't deserve chances at redemption. But you gave me a chance when you should have run. You saw something in me worth saving when I'd already decided I was beyond saving." He got down on one knee, and somewhere inside the mansion, Carlo and Franco stopped moving. The entire household seemed to hold its breath. "Marry me, Mia. Not because I'm powerful. Not because I can give you things. But because you make me want to be the man you think I am. Because every time I look at you and Emma, I remember why I fight. I remember why mercy matters." Mia couldn't speak. She could only nod, could only let the tears come, could only let him slide the ring onto her trembling finger. When she finally found her voice, it came out broken and beautiful and true. "Yes. Every day, yes. Always yes." They stood together in the December garden while the city hummed beyond the walls. Douglas Hale was in his prison cell, counting down the days of a 42-year sentence. Margaret Harrington was in another cell, watching her empire crumble from behind bars. Their power was gone. Their cruelty was ended. Justice had been systematic and thorough and absolute. But here, in the garden, there was something more than justice. There was redemption. There was a woman who'd been nobody, who'd been invisible, who'd been one eviction notice away from losing everything, standing beside a man who'd learned that the strongest thing a person could do was choose mercy. There was a child who would grow up knowing safety. There was a family that had been built not from blood, but from choice. From staying. From fighting. The wind came gentle this time, warm instead of bitter. It carried no blades. It carried only possibility. If this story moved your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't measured by their job title or their bank account. Subscribe because tomorrow we're bringing you another story about someone who refused to stay broken. Comment below, have you ever had to choose between running and fighting? What did you choose? I read every single comment. You matter. Your story matters. And remember, the storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think. I'll see you in the next one.